The hall was colder than the teen expected, not because of the weather, but because of how quiet everything felt inside. The large wooden doors had shut behind her, and for a moment she stood still, taking in the place where she had dreamed of performing. This was not a regular stage or a school auditorium. This was the main hall of a well-known courthouse that hosted one of the most respected youth music competitions in the region. Many young musicians hoped to stand here one day, but very few ever made it past the first round. She had worked for years for this moment, and yet her hands shook slightly as she walked deeper into the room. Her piano teacher had always told her that nerves were normal. If your hands tremble, let them. Just don't let your heart tremble too. She repeated those words silently as she followed the volunteer who guided her toward the stage. The bright lights made the edges of the room seem darker, but she could still see the panel of judges sitting in a long row. Most of them looked calm, focused, ready to listen. All except one. The man in the center had an expression that didn't change. Even when the teen approached the piano, his face was unreadable, his posture straight, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. He didn't smile or nod, the way some judges did when a contestant arrived. Instead, he glanced at his watch as if every minute mattered more than the person standing on the stage. The teen swallowed, wishing her heart would stop pounding so loudly. She placed her small bag next to the bench, then sat down. The piano felt cool beneath her fingertips when she touched it, trying to get a sense of the keys. She breathed in slowly. She had played on old keyboards, school instruments, and community center pianos, but nothing as polished as this. The sound it would make could either lift her or crush her, depending on how steady she remained. Around her, the room stayed silent. Even the air felt heavy, as if everyone expected perfection. The teen knew many skilled students had performed here before her. Some came from wealthy families, trained by famous teachers, and practiced on expensive instruments. She wasn't like them. She practiced on a second-hand keyboard that sometimes buzzed when the wires got loose. She practiced late at night because the house was too noisy during the day. She learned through effort, not luxury, but she had something no one could take from her hope. Even when things felt difficult, she held on to the dream that one day she could step into a hall like this and show people what her heart had been protecting all these years. The volunteer stepped aside, leaving her alone at the piano. Her legs trembled under the bench. She tried to steady herself by touching the keys gently, not to start playing yet, just to feel at home. Music had always been her safe place, a world where she didn't have to pretend anything or explain herself. Here, though, it felt harder to find that comfort. The judge at the center finally spoke. His voice was low and carried across the room without effort. "State your contestant number," she told him, trying not to stutter. He nodded once, without any warmth. "You may begin." Those words should have encouraged her, but they sounded more like an order. She lifted her hands, ready to play her warm-up piece, a short, gentle melody that always helped her loosen her fingers. But as soon as she started the first few notes, she heard the judge shift in his seat. She tried to ignore it and continued. A few seconds later, he lifted his hand sharply. "Stop." Her fingers froze. The sound of the piano cut off abruptly, leaving the room even quieter than before. She turned, slightly unsure what she had done wrong. The judge frowned. "Warm-ups are not necessary. Move directly to your performance piece. This is a competition, not a practice room." The teen nodded quickly, though her chest tightened. The warm-up was her way to breathe, to prepare, to settle her heartbeat. Without it, she felt thrown off balance. But she didn't want to argue. No one argued with this judge. She had heard the other contestants whispering earlier about his strict reputation, how he rarely showed emotion, and how he sometimes dismissed performers before they even finished. She placed her hands back on the keys, choosing her official piece. She had practiced it hundreds of times at home, even when tired, even when frustrated, even when her eyes felt heavy after schoolwork. She knew it well. She only had to trust herself. The first note rang out, soft but clear. The second followed, then the third. She tried to focus on the rhythm, but she couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched closely. The judge's eyes stayed fixed on her with an intensity that made her palms sweat. A few bars into the piece, her right hand slipped slightly. It wasn't a big mistake, just a small one. But in a quiet room like this, every error sounded louder. She tightened her jaw and corrected herself, trying not to fall apart. She kept playing, hoping the judge would let her finish. But before she could reach the emotional part of the melody, he raised his hand again. Enough. Her hands froze mid-air. Her breath stuck in her throat. Your posture is collapsing, and your timing is inconsistent. Stop here. The words struck her harder than she expected. She looked down at the keys, feeling heat rise behind her eyes. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. One of the other judges shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the strict man as if wanting to speak but deciding against it. The teen realized no one would step in for her. Not in this hall. Not in this moment. She nodded again, trying to stay respectful. Her voice was soft when she asked, "May I try one more piece? It's a short one." The judge didn't even wait a second. "No, time is limited. You may leave." Her heart sank. She felt she hadn't shown them who she really was, hadn't shown the music she carried inside her. Everything she practiced, everything she hoped for, felt like it was slipping away. She stood slowly, her legs heavy, her throat tight. She reached down to pick up her bag, fighting the urge to apologize again, even though she had nothing to apologize for. The piano bench creaked slightly as she stepped away. The hall seemed larger now, colder. As though it was pushing her out, she took one step toward the exit, then another. But with each step, something in her chest felt unfinished, as if she had walked away from the one thing that mattered most. The piece she wanted to play, the one she wasn't allowed to share, echoed quietly in her mind. A melody she had known by heart. It's a song that felt like home. She paused, her fingers tingled with the memory of it. She turned her head slightly toward the piano again. There was still silence. The judges waited. The strict man was already writing on his sheet. She knew walking away now meant accepting defeat. But music didn't wait for permission, and she wasn't. Sure, her heart could walk out of the room without playing the song that mattered most to her. She took a slow breath, her decision beginning to form inside her as naturally as a note rising from a quiet key. She wasn't done yet. The moment she turned back toward the piano, the air in the hall seemed to shift. She didn't sit down right away. She stood beside the bench, her fingers brushing against its edge, trying to gather the courage she thought she had lost only minutes earlier. She knew the rules. She knew she had already been dismissed. But she also knew something else. If she walked out now, she would never forgive herself. Her knees still felt shaky from the judge's harsh criticism. But something deeper pushed her forward. She lowered herself onto the bench again, gently, as though afraid the slightest noise might draw attention before she was ready. The judges looked up in surprise. Even the volunteers near the walls paused. The strict judge lifted his head slowly. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice carrying across the room like a cold wind. The teen didn't answer right away. She wasn't trying to be defiant. She simply needed a moment to breathe. She placed her fingertips lightly on the keys, feeling the smooth surface settle her nerves a little. I want to play one more piece." Her voice was soft, almost too soft for a room like this, but she refused to let it break. The judge's eyes narrowed. "I already told you, I know," she whispered, still not turning away from the keys. "But I need to play this one." For the first time, a faint murmur came from the other judges. One of them leaned forward slightly, curious but unsure whether to speak. The teen didn't wait for permission. If she did, she knew she'd lose her courage. She started to play. It was a different piece, gentler, softer, warmer. The notes rose like a quiet voice speaking from somewhere deep inside her. Her fingers moved with a confidence she didn't even know she had left after the judge's harsh words at first. She thought she heard the judge push his chair back, as if preparing to interrupt again. She braced herself, expecting the sound of his voice telling her to stop, but it never came. Instead, silence settled behind her, heavy focused. She kept playing. The melody was one she had learned in the most unexpected way. Years ago, she had a neighbor, an elderly woman who lived alone and often played her piano in the evenings. The teen used to listen through her window, drawn in by the gentle music that always made the neighborhood feel calm. One day, the neighbor invited her inside and taught her the piece. "Play it with your heart, not your hands," the woman used to say. Now, each key she pressed felt like bringing that warm memory back to life. The harmony rose and fell softly, weaving through the hall like a quiet story only she could tell. She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't try to show skill. She simply let her heart speak. Halfway through the piece, something unusual happened. She sensed a shift behind her. The strict judge wasn't writing anymore. The scraping of his pen had stopped. She didn't dare turn around to look. She felt his stillness like a weight in the room. Her fingers moved with more confidence. The music flowing easily, as though every doubt she had felt earlier had dissolved into the melody. For once, she didn't worry about mistakes. She didn't care about the score. She didn't think about the cold look the judge had given her at the beginning. She only cared about the song. When she reached the softest part, she let the notes linger a little longer than usual, allowing the emotion to settle. Her breath steadied with each chord. Even though she couldn't see them, she felt the other judges watching her with a different kind of attention, one that wasn't built on rules or expectations, but on the simple truth of the moment. As she approached the final few notes, she slowed slightly, letting the ending carry the same warmth as the beginning. When her fingers lifted from the keys, the silence that followed wasn't sharp or cold. It felt full. She stared down at the piano, not ready to look up yet. Her heart thudded in her chest, but it didn't feel painful this time. It felt alive. Then she heard a voice. "Where did you learn that?" She recognized the voice instantly. It was the strict judge. But his tone, it wasn't harsh. It wasn't cold. It was something else. Something she never imagined hearing from him. She slowly turned her head. The judge wasn't leaning back in his chair anymore. He wasn't staring at his notes or checking his watch. He was standing. His eyes were fixed on her, with an expression she couldn't understand. It wasn't anger. It wasn't impatience. It was something closer to disbelief. She swallowed hard. "A neighbor taught me," she said quietly. "A long time ago." The judge's face softened, just barely, but enough that everyone in the hall noticed. The other judges exchanged surprised glances. One of them whispered something under their breath. "And how did your neighbor learn it?" he asked, his voice almost gentle now. I don't know," she admitted. "She just played it often. I loved how it sounded, and she showed me." The judge lowered his gaze for a moment, as though searching for something in a place only he could see. When he looked up again, his eyes were different. Warmer, sadder, softer. "You played it exactly right," he said quietly. The teen blinked in confusion. Exactly right. She had been so nervous. She wasn't sure she had played perfectly. The judge took a slow breath. "That piece, it's not published. It wasn't recorded. Almost no one knows it." His voice trembled faintly at the edges. Even though he tried to hide it, a hush swept through the hall. "It was written by someone very dear to me," he continued. "Someone I haven't heard in many years." The teen felt her heart sink. Not out of fear now, but out of something heavier, something sincere. She didn't know who he meant, but the emotion in his voice made it clear the person mattered deeply. He stepped closer. Not enough to break the rules of the competition, but enough to show he was no longer the distant figure he had been moments ago. "How did you know to play it like that?" he asked. She shook her head lightly. "I just felt it," she said. "It always reminded me of a warm evening, like someone was telling a story without words." The judge pressed his lips together slowly, fighting some emotion she couldn't name. The teen suddenly felt unsure. Had she done something wrong by playing it? Had it touched a painful memory? She lowered her voice to almost a whisper. "I didn't mean to upset you," he shook his head quickly. "You didn't. You just surprised me." His voice was softer than she had ever heard from him, almost fragile. For the first time since entering the hall, she saw the faintest hint of a smile on one corner of his mouth, though it was filled with sadness. One of the other judges finally spoke up, clearing their throat. "Should we continue with the scoring?" The strict judge didn't look away from her. Not yet. The room went still again. He took a breath. Play it once more. The teen stared at him. Again. She asked softly. Yes, he said. Please. She didn't know what to say. Permission had been denied to her earlier, and now the most feared. Judge was asking her almost gently to play the same piece again. She nodded slowly and placed her hands back on the keys. This time, she wasn't nervous. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't afraid of judgment. She was playing for someone. With the first notes, the judge closed his eyes. His shoulders dropped slightly, as if a heavy weight he carried every day had loosened. The other judges watched him with quiet amazement. No one had ever seen him like this. As she continued, the room seemed too warm. Her hands moved with the same softness, the same heart. But now there was something more, something shared. When she finished the second time, she didn't look up right away. But she didn't need to. She could feel the change in the room. She had not planned to stay. She had not planned to break rules. She had not planned to touch the heart of the coldest judge in the hall. But music sometimes finds its way through walls. Even words cannot break. And today, it had reached someone who hadn't expected to feel anything at all. The hall stayed silent long after the last note faded. The teen kept her hands resting on the piano keys, not moving, not speaking. Almost afraid that if she shifted, the moment would break. She didn't know what would happen next. She only knew that something had changed in the room, something she couldn't explain. When she finally lifted her hands, she could hear her own heartbeat. It wasn't fast the way it had been before. It was steady now, calmer, as if the music had quieted something inside her. She slowly looked up, unsure of what she would see. The strict judge was still standing. His eyes were softer, not cold and sharp like earlier. He looked at her with a strange mixture of surprise and memory, as if he was seeing someone else layered over her image. The other judges watched him carefully, waiting for him to speak first, but he didn't. Not at first. Instead, he took a slow breath, almost like he was gathering strength before talking. Then he stepped closer. Not too close, but enough that she could see the slight tremble in his hands. You play with feeling, he said quietly. It was the last thing she expected to hear from him. It didn't sound like the same man who had cut her off sharply just minutes earlier, who had criticized her posture and timing, who had told her she wasn't ready. A small part of her wanted to smile, but she held back. She didn't know if it was the right moment. Thank you, she said in a soft voice. He nodded slowly, as if the words mattered in a way he couldn't express. Then he sat down again, but he didn't lean back the way he usually did. He rested his elbows on the table, hands clasped, eyes thoughtful. One of the other judges cleared their throat gently and asked, "Shall we proceed?" The strict judge didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the teen again. "Do you know what that piece is?" She hesitated, unsure what he meant. "Only that my neighbor played it a lot," she replied. "She never told me where it came from." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening as though he were holding back something heavy. It was written by someone important, someone who only shared it privately. The teen listened quietly, sensing the depth in his tone. "She composed it in our living room," he continued, "late at night, when the world was quiet." The other judges exchanged looks. None of them seemed to know this part of his life. It was clear he wasn't a man who revealed personal things easily. She used to say music speaks when words fail, he added. Speaking more to himself than to anyone else, the teen stayed silent, letting him find his words at his own pace. The hall was still, everyone watching him closely. Even the volunteers whispered to one another in the back. Unsure of what they were witnessing, the strict judge took another deep breath. That was the last piece she ever wrote. The teen felt something tighten in her chest. She didn't know the details, but she understood loss. She understood that when someone speaks about a person they cared for, their voice changes. The judge's voice had that sound, that melody. His voice faded for a moment, then returned quieter. "I haven't heard it played in years." The teen nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. She didn't want to intrude on a memory that wasn't hers. Another judge finally spoke, trying to gently guide the moment. Perhaps we should give the contestant a break before we continue with the scoring. The strict judge didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted his eyes toward the teen again. "Would you mind staying for a moment?" he asked. She was surprised, but she nodded. "I can stay." He exhaled softly, almost like relief. The other judges leaned back, giving him the space to speak. They didn't interrupt, knowing something unusual was happening. The strict judge folded his hands, his eyes drifting as if he was seeing a different time. "She used to hum that tune before she wrote it down," said, his gaze distant. "She said it reminded her of walking by the river during sunset. She always felt safe there." Teen listened closely, absorbing every word. She didn't know the judge's story, but she understood the love behind his tone. He let the silence fill the room for a moment before he continued. "After she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to listen to it. I stored the sheet away. I never shared it with anyone." The teen blinked, confused. "Then, how did my neighbor know it?" He looked at her quietly for a moment. "Your neighbor must have been someone who heard her play, or someone she trusted." She thought back to the warm evenings when the neighbor would sit by her window, playing the song over and over again, sometimes with her eyes closed, sometimes humming softly. "She taught it to me one summer," the teen said. "No, it was so special." The judge's lips tightened, but not in frustration. "It was something like emotion raw, deep, almost fragile. It was special," he said quietly. "But you played it as if you understood it too." The teen didn't know how to answer. She never thought her simple connection to a melody could touch someone's heart this way. The judge stood slowly. He didn't look strict anymore. He didn't look cold. He looked human. He took a slow step toward the stage, stopping at a respectful distance. "When you played it," he paused, struggling for the right words. For a moment, it felt like she was here again. The teen felt her throat tighten. She didn't want to cry, but the sincerity in his voice made her eyes sting a little. "She loved music more than anything," he added softly. "And she always said that one day someone would play her melody and give it new life." He looked at her with a calm sincerity that felt almost unreal coming from him. "I think you did that today."
Ow.
The teen felt warmth rise in her chest. She didn't know what to say. Never imagined her playing would mean something so deep to anyone, especially someone as stern as him. Before she could respond, one of the other judges gently cleared their throat. "Should we take a short break?" The strict judge blinked as if brought back from a distant memory. Then he nodded. "Yes, short break." He looked back at the teen. "Please, stay in the hall. I'll speak with you after." She nodded, unsure what he wanted but willing to listen. The judges whispered among themselves as they stood and stepped to the side. Some looked surprised, some looked touched, others simply looked speechless. The teen sat quietly at the piano bench, her hands resting in her lap. She didn't want to move.
Ow.
She didn't know whether to feel proud, confused, or overwhelmed. Had shifted so quickly, minutes passed, though they felt longer. She could hear the faint sound of conversations between judges at the back of the room. The volunteers stayed by the walls, unsure whether they should leave or stay. Finally, the strict judge approached her again. But now his footsteps were softer, almost hesitant. He stopped near the piano. "You must think I was very hard on you earlier." She looked down, choosing her words carefully. "You were strict," she said quietly, "but I understand competitions." "Are serious?" He sighed, a long, tired sound. "I was harder than I needed to be." She lifted her eyes in surprise. He looked at the piano, not at her. "When I judge, I focus on rules, technique, discipline. It's easier that way, cleaner, predictable. But music isn't always about rules." The teen nodded slowly. She had learned that from her neighbor long ago. "When you started playing earlier," he continued, "I reacted from habit. I didn't give you a chance." She swallowed gently. "It's okay." "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't." She stared at him, unsure how to respond. He looked at her again, truly looking. You reminded me that music can still reach places nothing else can, even places I've kept locked away for a long time." The teen lowered her gaze. It's touched in a way she didn't know how to express. He stepped closer to the piano and lightly touched the edge of it, as if remembering something tender. "When you played her piece," said, "you opened a door I thought was closed forever." The teen felt the weight of his words settle warmly inside her. "I want you to play your main piece again later," he said, this time without interruption. She lifted her head in surprise. "Really?" He nodded. "Really?" Her chest felt lighter. "Thank you," gave a small, genuine nod, something no one in the hall had seen from him in years. "Take a moment to rest," he said. "We'll resume soon." As he walked back to the judge's table, something had clearly changed, not just in him, but in the atmosphere of the entire hall. For the first time since she had entered, the teen felt she belonged. And she knew the story of this competition was no longer about winning or losing. It had become something much deeper, something she hadn't expected when she first sat down at the piano. The next morning came with a gentle breeze moving across the city, and the girl woke up earlier than usual. She had barely slept, but not because of nerves. Her mind kept replaying every moment from the day before, especially the short time she had spent in front of the judge. Even though he had stopped her and sent her away, she could not forget the silence in his eyes. For some reason she did not fully understand yet, she felt there was more behind that moment than simple strictness. She spent the morning tuning the small keyboard she kept at home. It was old and a little out of shape, but it still worked well. Enough for her to practice. She played simple warm-up notes. She felt something changing inside her. Yesterday's experience had lit a spark. She wanted to understand why the judge had reacted the way he did, and she wanted to give her best performance, no matter what happened. Her guardian watched her from the kitchen table, sipping tea and saying nothing. He knew better than to interrupt her when she was lost in music. After a while, she stopped playing and looked up at him with calm but determined eyes. "I have to go back today," she told him quietly. He didn't argue. He just nodded, understanding that something inside her had already decided. The walk to the hall felt different this time. She walked slowly, noticing every building, every tree, every sound. Her steps were steady, but her heart beat fast with a mixture of fear and excitement. When she reached the doors of the hall, she stood still for a moment. The structure looked even larger than the day before, almost intimidating. She reminded herself that music was her comfort. As long as she had that, she could walk into any room. Inside, the hall buzzed with quiet chatter. Contestants were stretching their fingers, checking sheet music, or whispering with family members. A few recognized her from the previous day. One of them gave her a small smile, as if cheering her on without words. She smiled back. She sat down on one of the benches by the wall, closed her eyes, and breathed slowly. Every moment she had practiced at home ran through her mind, and she tried to hold on to the calmness. A staff member approached and handed her a slip of paper. "You're scheduled after 2 more contestants," a staff member informed her. She thanked them politely and looked down at the paper, reading the number 14. For some reason, seeing the number made her more nervous. She folded the paper, placed it in her pocket, tried to steady her breathing again as she sat quietly. She heard faint music from inside the hall where contestants were performing. Some played with confidence, others with shaky hands, but every sound traveled through the hallway, reminding her how close her turn was. She listened closely, not to compare herself with them, but to remind herself that every performer brought their own story. A few minutes later, one of the staff members opened the door and called, "Number 14, please be ready." Her heart skipped. She stood up, her legs feeling a little stiff, but she kept moving, walked toward the door, holding her small bag close to her side. When she stepped inside the hall, the lights felt brighter than the day before. The audience was silent, waiting. And up at the judges' panel sat the same judge from yesterday. Their eyes met for a moment. His expression did not change, but something in his gaze felt softer than before, almost as if he remembered something and wasn't sure how to react. She lowered her eyes and focused on the piano. The instrument looked beautiful under the spotlights. Its polished surface reflected the faint glow from above, and its keys, perfectly clean and smooth, seemed to invite her. She approached it slowly, placing her fingertips on the edge of the bench before sitting down. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them above the keys. She closed her eyes for one breath, calming herself the way she had been taught. Then she began. The first notes came softly, almost like a whisper. She started with a gentle melody she had practiced since she was young, something simple but full of emotion. As the notes floated into the air, the room quieted even more. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, though his face remained unreadable. She continued letting the music guide her. Her hands grew steadier with each passing moment. She wasn't thinking about the audience or the judges. She was thinking only about the story she wanted to tell through her music. She played the rising notes like hope climbing a mountain, and the softer notes like memories fading into the distance. For a moment, she forgot she was in a competition at all. When she reached the middle of the piece, she felt her confidence growing. She moved into a section with more power, her fingers dancing across the keys with surprising strength. People in the audience exchanged impressed glances. Some leaned forward, caught in the emotion of her performance. But then, something unexpected happened. As she played the transition into the next part of the piece, one of the notes she hit produced a tiny, sharp sound key that was slightly out of tune. It wasn't a big mistake, but it startled her. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, and the judge's eyes sharpened. Noticing everything, she blinked, recovered quickly, and continued playing. But the brief pause shook her more than she expected. Her hands started trembling again, and a wave of panic tried to rise in her chest. She fought it by breathing slowly through her nose as she played, trying to keep the music steady. She focused on every key, every sound, every small detail. After a few measures, she slowly found her balance again. The audience could feel her struggle, but they could also feel her determination. That small moment of vulnerability made her performance even more human, more real. When she finally reached the end of the piece, she finished with a soft, lingering note that seemed to float in the air longer than it should have. She lifted her fingers slowly, as if releasing a delicate thought. The hall was silent. Then, gentle applause spread through the room, not loud or explosive, but respectful and sincere. She stood up, bowed with a quiet grace, stepped back from the piano. As she turned to walk off the stage, she felt the judge's eyes on her again. This time, when she glanced up, she saw something different in his expressions, something thoughtful, almost troubled. She walked out of the hall with a mix of pride and confusion. She had done her best, but she could not shake the feeling that something important had happened, something she didn't fully understand. Outside in the hallway, her guardian was waiting for her. He smiled gently and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You played beautifully," he whispered. She nodded, still trying to process everything. They walked together toward the exit, passing contestants who were preparing for their turn. Some looked nervous, others excited. A few gave her warm smiles, and she returned them politely. When they reached the doors of the building, she took one last look back at the hall. She didn't know what the judge was thinking, but she felt as though her performance had reached him in some way. As she stepped outside and the cool air touched her face, she felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. Her heart carried a mix of relief and unanswered questions. She didn't know it yet. But the judge wasn't finished with her story, and what happened next would change everything for both of them. The afternoon carried a strange stillness after her performance. Even though the hall was filled with music from other contestants, she felt as if her own world had gone quiet the moment she stepped off the stage. The applause still echoed faintly in her ears, not overwhelming, not loud, just steady and sincere. But it was the judge's expression that kept replaying in her mind. It bothered her and comforted her at the same time. Her guardian walked beside her as they reached the street outside. Cars passed by in their usual rush, but she moved slowly, trying to understand why she felt so restless. When they reached the bus stop, she finally spoke. "Do you think I did all right?" she asked softly. He looked at her with gentle eyes. "You did more than all right. You played with feeling." People could hear your heart. Day. She nodded, though the answer didn't lift. The weight from her chest. Something inside her felt unfinished. When they reached home, she went to her room without saying much. She placed her bag on the chair and sat on the edge of her bed. Her keyboard sat on the table across the room, silent and waiting. She stared at it for a long time, wondering if she should practice, rest, or just lie down instead. She reached for her notebook, the same one she used to write down thoughts whenever she felt confused. She opened a fresh page and wrote down only one sentence. What did he hear in my music? She didn't know what answer she expected. But writing the words made her feel slightly calmer. Her guardian called her for dinner, but she didn't eat much. Her mind kept drifting back to the hall. She remembered the judge sitting in the center seat, his hands folded in front of him. His eyes focused with an intensity she couldn't quite describe. When she had hit that small wrong note, she had seen something shift in his expression. It wasn't anger or disappointment, it was recognition. Recognition of what? She wondered. That night she lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the judge's face. It was strange to her. She didn't know him, didn't know anything about his life, yet she felt connected to him through that brief moment of music. It felt almost like she had touched something personal inside him. She finally fell asleep near dawn, her thoughts still tangled. The next morning, the sun was already high when she woke up. Her guardian had let her sleep in, knowing the previous day had been exhausting. When she stepped into the kitchen, he smiled at her. You should go for a walk, he suggested gently. Clear your mind, she nodded. A walk sounded like the right thing to do. She made her way to the park near their home. It was a simple place, a few benches, wide open grass, and tall trees that swayed softly with the breeze. Children played. In the distance, while older people walked slowly, enjoying the morning air, she chose a quiet spot under a tree and sat down. For a long time, she watched the leaves move above her. The calmness of the place helped her breathe easier. After a while, she reached into her bag and pulled out the small folded paper the staff had given her at the hall. The slip with the number 14. She stared at it, feeling a strange mix of pride and uncertainty. Just then, someone approached. She looked up, startled, and saw a woman she recognized from the competition hall. It was one of the staff members from the judging area, someone who had guided contestants in and out. The woman offered a gentle smile. I'm sorry to disturb you. I was hoping I'd find you here. The girl blinked in confusion. It's everything. All right, the woman nodded. Yes, everything is fine. Actually, I came with a message for you. A message. Yes, the woman said. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. The head judge would like to speak with you. The girl's breath caught. With me? Yes. He asked me personally to find you. He said it was important. Her hands grew cold. She didn't know whether to feel afraid or curious. When? She asked quietly. Today, the woman replied. If you're willing, he would like to meet you in the small rehearsal room behind the hall. He said he only needs a short conversation. For a moment, the girl didn't respond. Her heart pounded with an intensity she hadn't felt before. She didn't know why the judge wanted to speak with her. Part of her feared she had done something wrong. The woman noticed her hesitation and added softly, He didn't seem upset. If anything, he seemed thoughtful. Those words eased her fear just a little. The woman handed her a small card with the time and room number written on it. We'll be waiting, she said before leaving. The girl sat still long after the woman left. She read the card multiple times, her mind spinning. She wasn't sure what the judge could possibly want from her. No other contestant was being called in separately. Was this good or bad? She didn't know. After a long while, she stood up. Her legs felt tense, but she walked back home slowly, each step giving her more time to think. When she arrived, her guardian looked up from the living room and immediately noticed something was troubling her. She handed him the card. He read it carefully and looked up at her with calm, steady eyes. Do you want to go? She swallowed hard. I think I have to. Yeah. Then I'll walk with you. She felt grateful for that. The trip back to the hall felt heavier than the day before. Not because she feared performing, but because she feared what she might hear. She wondered if he wanted to discuss her mistake, or her choice of peace, or maybe her participation in general when they reached the rear entrance of the hall. The woman from earlier greeted them and guided the girl toward the rehearsal room. It was a small, quiet space with a single piano in the center and soft lighting. The judge stood near the piano, his hands behind his back, his posture straight and composed. Her guardian waited outside while she stepped inside. "Hello, the judge said gently, surprising her with his softer tone. She lowered her head slightly. "Hello, sir." For a moment the room was quiet. The judge studied her carefully, not in a harsh way, but in a thoughtful one. Then he spoke. "Your performance yesterday," he began slowly, "was not like most I've heard." She tensed. "Not sure whether this was a compliment or a criticism," he continued. "You play with pure feeling. Your technique needs polishing, but your heart understands music." She felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she whispered. The judge took a small breath, as if choosing his next words carefully. "There was a moment yesterday," he said, his voice softer now, "when you shifted the melody. Just slightly. It was not part of the original piece." She swallowed hard, afraid she had done something wrong. "I'm sorry if no," he interrupted gently. "Don't apologize that moment. It was familiar to me," she lifted her eyes to meet his. He looked almost vulnerable as he continued. "My late wife used to play with the same shift in tone. It was something only she did," she said. "It made the piece feel more alive." The girl felt a deep stillness inside her. The judge looked away for a moment, gathering himself. "When I heard you do that, it was like hearing her again." Just for a second, she didn't know what to say. She had never expected her playing to touch someone in such a personal way. The judge took a small step closer to the piano. "Did someone teach you that variation?" She shook her head. "No, sir. It just felt right." He let out a slow breath, almost in disbelief, for the first time. She saw a softness in his eyes, something warm, something human. He gestured to the piano. "Would you play it again? It's just that part." Her heart fluttered. She nodded slowly and walked toward the piano. As she sat down, she placed her fingers gently on the keys and recreated the moment, the soft shift in tone, the slight change in timing. The judge closed his eyes, listening. When she finished, the room remained quiet. Then the judge opened his eyes, and there was something in them she had not expected: gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. She stood up slowly, unsure whether their conversation was over or just beginning. The judge remained silent for another moment, then finally said, "I would like to offer you something." Her breath caught, not knowing what he meant. Whatever the judge was about to say next would change the rest of her journey. The girl stood very still, her hands lightly resting against her sides as she waited for the judge to speak. The room felt smaller now, almost like the air had shifted. The judge took a gentle breath before turning fully toward her. His eyes held something new, something softer, something that felt almost like hope, mixed with hesitation. "I would like to offer you guidance," he said quietly, "not as part of the competition, not as a judge, but as someone who sees potential in you." She blinked, unsure she had heard him correctly. "Guidance?" She echoed. "Yes," he replied with a slow nod. "You have a natural connection to music. It's rare, and it deserves to be nurtured. I can help you grow if you're willing." Her heart felt too full, beating hard against her ribs as if it couldn't hold everything she felt. No one had ever offered her something like this before. Not in such a calm, sincere way. "Why me?" she whispered, before she could stop herself. The judge didn't seem offended by the question. Instead, he looked thoughtful. "'Cause your playing carries honesty," he said. "Technique can be taught. Discipline can be learned, but sincerity, that is born inside someone. And you have it." She lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. Judge stepped back toward the piano and gently placed his hand on the edge of it. "My wife believed that music reached people in ways words never could," he continued softly. Before she passed, I promised myself I would keep music alive, in whatever way I could. For a long time, I thought that meant staying strict, staying distant, and making sure others respected the craft. But listening to you yesterday made me realize I had forgotten something important. He paused, his voice tightening just slightly. Music is not only about perfection, it is about connection. The girl felt her throat grow tight. She didn't know what to say, so she stayed quiet, letting him speak. The judge straightened his posture a little. If you allow me, I would like to mentor you. Not for applause, not for competitions, but simply to help you grow. She wanted to accept right away, but she also felt unsure. Was she ready? Was she capable? Did she deserve such an opportunity? These thoughts rushed through her mind in a matter of seconds. Finally, she lifted her head and said quietly, I would be honored. The judge's expression softened even further. He nodded gently. Good. At that moment, her guardian entered the doorway, waiting silently to see if the conversation was over. The judge stepped aside and gestured toward him. May I speak with you as well? He asked respectfully. Her guardian stepped into the room, calm and steady. The girl stood beside him, unsure what the judge wanted to discuss. I want to reassure. You, the judge said gently to her guardian. My intention is only to help her. She has a gift worth developing. I would like to offer regular sessions, nothing overwhelming, so she can grow with proper guidance. Her guardian looked at the girl, who watched him with wide, hopeful eyes. He saw the longing there, the spark that had always lived inside her. He took a deep breath and then nodded. Double quotes. If she wants this, he said, then I will support it. She felt her chest warm with relief. The judge smiled faintly, a small but sincere expression. Thank you, he said. They discussed a few details, timing, days, and how the lessons would work. Everything felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from if she blinked too hard. When they finally left the room, she walked down the hallway with a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. Her guardian placed a hand on her shoulder. You did well, said softly. She nodded, unable to keep the small smile from forming on her lips. The next few days passed quickly. She practiced more than usual, not out of fear, but out of excitement. She wanted to make the most of the opportunities she had been given. Her small keyboard at home seemed to glow under her fingertips each time she played. When the day came for her first lesson with the judge, she felt nervous but ready. She arrived early at the hall, her hands slightly cold from the morning air. As she entered the rehearsal room, the judge was already there, sitting quietly beside the piano. You're early, he said with a small smile. I wanted to be, she responded. He nodded. That is a good sign. He guided her through warm-ups, showing her ways to control her breathing, improve her hand posture, and listen to the music with deeper awareness. His teaching style was calm but precise, never raised his voice, never scolded. When she made mistakes, he simply encouraged her to try again. With each lesson, she grew more confident. She began understanding music differently, not just as sounds, but as stories, emotions, and memories. Weeks passed, her connection with the judge grew stronger, not in a complicated or uncomfortable way, but in a respectful, supportive one. He treated her like a student he believed in, and she treated him like someone whose guidance she valued deeply. One afternoon, after a long session, the judge sat back and studied her quietly. You're improving quickly, he said. Today, I want you to play something from your heart. It's not a piece on paper, something you feel. She froze slightly, unsure how to respond. I've never made my own music, she admitted. That doesn't matter, he said gently. Close your eyes. Think of something important to you. Then let your hands tell the story. She hesitated, then did as he asked. She closed her eyes and allowed her thoughts to drift to the small moments, the struggles, the hopes, the quiet. Mornings practicing on her old keyboard. She thought of her guardian, of the judge's late wife, whose memory lived in a single shift of melody, and of the unexpected path her life had taken. Her fingers began to move, soft at first, gentle like a beginning, then stronger, filled with emotion she didn't realize she had been carrying. The judge listened, still and silent, absorbing every note. When she finished, she opened her eyes slowly, unsure of what she had created. The judge looked deeply moved. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "You just wrote your first piece," he said, "and it is beautiful." Her heart swelled. He continued softly, "One day others will hear your music, and they will feel something real." Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from a strange mix of gratitude and disbelief. After that day, her confidence grew even more. She practiced with new purpose, new joy. The judge continued to guide her, always patient, always thoughtful. Months passed. She entered another competition, this time not to prove herself, but simply to share her music. She played with a calm confidence, her heart leading her as much as her hands. When she finished, the audience applauded loudly. She didn't win first place, but she didn't mind. What she gained felt far greater. After the event, the judge found her outside. His eyes were warm. "You've come a long way," he told her. "So have you," she replied gently. He chuckled softly, acknowledging the truth in her words. They stood there for a moment, sharing a quiet understanding. The sun was setting behind the buildings, casting a warm orange glow over everything. The judge placed a hand over his chest for a brief moment, a gesture she recognized as something meaningful. "My wife would have been proud of you," he said. Her breath caught. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded, feeling the weight and beauty of his words. He continued, "And I am proud too." Those simple words reached deeper than she expected. She took a slow breath, letting the moment settle. The judge looked toward the horizon. "Your journey is only beginning," he said quietly. She followed his gaze. The world felt wide, full of possibilities she had never imagined. "Yes," she whispered. "I know." And with that, another chapter of her life opened, one filled with new music, new courage, and the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. The cold judge who once stopped her performance had become the person who helped her find her voice, and the girl who walked into that hall with trembling hands now walked forward with a heart full of music, ready for whatever came next. The morning after everything that had happened, the air felt different around the small house. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comes from peace. It was the kind that carries questions, worries, and silent hopes. The young woman woke up earlier than usual, her mind already busy with thoughts even before her feet touched the floor. She knew this day would matter. She didn't know how, but something inside her said things were changing fast. She stepped outside with a cup of warm tea, letting the calm wind brush against her face. Across the street, the neighbor's old dog barked lazily, greeting the start of another ordinary day. But for her, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Everything she had discovered after hearing truths she had never expected. Her life felt like it had shifted in a direction she wasn't prepared for. Still, she knew running from it wasn't an option. As she sat on the small wooden bench outside her home, she replayed the conversation from the night before. Every word carried weight. Every detail felt like a missing piece, finally finding its place. She felt grateful, but also overwhelmed. It was strange how life could change in a moment, how one act of kindness could open doors she didn't even know existed. Before she had time to lose herself in thought again, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned and saw the man who had helped her so much recently. He wasn't dressed in his usual confident manner. Instead, he looked more thoughtful, maybe even nervous. His expression softened when he saw her. "Hope I'm not too early," said quietly. She shook her head and gave a small smile. "I was already awake." He stood there for a second as if trying to find the right words. Then he finally spoke. "Yesterday. Everything that happened. I know it was a lot. But I want you to know something. Nothing about this changes who you are. And nothing about your past makes you any less deserving of the life you want." His words caught her off guard. She looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. She had never heard anything like that before. For so long, she had carried the heavy belief that her circumstances defined her worth. Hearing someone say otherwise felt almost unreal. "You didn't have to say that," she whispered. "I know," he replied, "but I needed to." There was a sincerity in his voice that made it impossible for her to doubt him. She lifted her eyes slowly, meeting his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was a quiet understanding. They walked inside and she prepared a simple breakfast. Neither of them talked much at first. The silence wasn't awkward, just natural. Sometimes people didn't need big words, they only needed presence. After they finished, he cleared his throat. "There's something I want to show you today," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Where are we going?" "You'll see," he replied with a small grin. Trying to lighten the mood, she felt a mix of nerves and curiosity, but she trusted him enough to follow. They walked to the car and soon they were driving through the winding streets of the city. The buildings passed by like moving shadows, but she barely noticed them. Her mind was still trying to guess where he was taking her. After almost an hour, the car slowed down. They pulled up to a place she had never been before, a quiet part of town filled with tall trees, clean sidewalks, and beautiful homes. The kind of place she never imagined entering. She looked at him questioningly, but he only nodded toward a large building ahead. "Come on," he said. She followed, feeling tiny in front of the massive doors. When they stepped inside, she immediately noticed it wasn't a home. It was something else, something important. A community center, bright walls, friendly faces, warm laughter echoing from different rooms. "What is this place?" she asked. "It's where I grew up," he replied softly. "Not literally, but it's the place that shaped me. Someone here helped me turn my life around when I had nothing. And today, I wanted you to meet that person." Her eyes widened. She didn't expect this. She definitely didn't expect to feel a strange mix of comfort and anticipation. A woman approached them older, gentle, with kind eyes that immediately made her feel welcome. "So this must be the girl you told me about," the woman said with a warm smile. The young woman felt her cheeks heat up. I hope he didn't say anything strange." "Oh, he did," the woman laughed. "But all good things." The young woman glanced at him. He looked embarrassed but happy. The older woman guided her through the center, showing her different rooms, art studios, reading areas, and small spaces where people learned skills and shared their stories. Every room seemed filled with purpose. Every corner held hope. "This place exists because someone once believed I was worth believing." The man said softly behind her. "And I think you deserve the same chance." Her heart tightened. "But why me?" "Because you don't see what others can see clearly," he answered. "You're strong, you're kind. You keep going, even when everything around you tells you to stop. People like you deserve support, not struggle." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken about her like this. The older woman touched her shoulder gently. "You've been carrying too much alone. Let us help you uncarry some of it. You're safe here." Tears filled her eyes. It's not from sadness, but from the feeling of finally being understood. They spent hours there,
talking, sharing stories,
and learning what opportunities the center offered. She didn't want to admit it, but for the first time in a long time, she began to feel hopeful about her future. Later that afternoon, when they walked outside, the sun was already setting, painting the sky with soft orange light. She stood there, quietly watching the horizon. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded slowly. "I think so. I didn't expect today to be like this." He smiled, a soft, genuine smile. Good things can happen unexpectedly, too. She took a deep breath. "Thank you for everything. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to," he replied. "You deserve a chance to stand on your own, without fear holding you back." For a moment, she simply looked at him, really looked at him. She realized he wasn't helping her out of pity. He saw something in her that she had never seen in herself. As they drove back home, she leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights blur into soft shapes. Her mind wasn't heavy anymore. Instead, it felt full of something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. When they reached her home, she stepped out of the car slowly. The night air was cool, but somehow comforting. He stepped out as well, standing near the car door. "We'll take things one step at a time. You're not alone in this," he said. She nodded softly. "I believe you." They stood there under the quiet sky, neither of them speaking, yet both understanding that something important had started. Something real, something that could change everything. And deep inside her heart, beneath the fears, the doubts, and the memories of all her struggles, a small spark began to grow. A spark strong enough to light a new path. A spark she wasn't willing to lose.